Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 81, The Battle of Jutland, Part 2. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the Danish fleet and the Hamburg fleet met on the sea 30 kilometers northwest of Esbjerg, the western port of Jutland Peninsula. In fact, after seeing that the opponent had 120 warships, the Hamburg fleet, which had only 90 warships under normal circumstances, would have withdrawn long ago. However, Rolf, commander-in-chief of the Hamburg fleet, knew that to their west, there were 40 East Frisian warships ready to support at any time. Moreover, the four-party alliance had already made a plan to defeat the main force of the Danish navy in this battle. Therefore, although he was unsure, Rolf gritted his teeth and issued an order to fight. Seeing that the opponent did not escape, the commander of the Danish fleet, Alkinson, was also a little surprised. The Hamburg guys didn't escape. Are they confident that they can defeat our powerful Danish fleet? Alkinson was surprised. However, he didn't care whether the Hamburg fleet escaped or not. It would be best if they didn't escape. Alkinson planned to defeat the opponent in one battle. So he ordered loudly, "Archers and catapults are ready. Archers fire rockets when approaching." In addition, the grappling hook team should pay attention to hooking the enemy ship. Everyone should pay attention to boarding the enemy ship and destroying the enemy. Front row warships approach the enemy. The Danish fleet was still using the traditional naval warfare mode of the Middle Ages, which was to use bows and trebuchets to attack the enemy when approaching. Once the two ships were boarding, they would use grappling hooks to hook the enemy ship. Then, they would jump off the ship and chop. Of course, the Danes did not have flag language, and Alkinson's orders were all shouted by the sailors with the loudest voices on the ship one by one. There was actually nothing wrong with doing this. However, they did not know that this method of shouting was effective in a pure cold weapon environment. But as soon as the cannon sounded, Rolf, the commander of the Hamburg fleet, saw the Danish fleet approaching, and hurriedly ordered, "All warships in the front row, be well defended. The firefighting team should prepare water, and do not let the opponent's rockets set the ship on fire. The spear team must stop the enemy sailors from jumping off the ship." Then, the flag signal soldiers under his command passed the order down. The mission of the Hamburg fleet is just to entangle the Danish fleet, not to attack. Moreover, their strength is indeed not as good as that of Denmark. In particular, they do not have as many experienced sailors as Denmark. Like the Danish fleet, the Hamburg fleet is currently in the medieval naval warfare mode. They also use bows, trebuchets and sailors' scimitars to fight. Of course, as the defending party, the Hamburgers joined the spear team. This type of soldiers was suggested by Marin. In ancient boarding battles, the two ships were not completely close to each other. Often, the attacking party would hook the attacked ship with a grappling hook, and then the sailors would climb towards the enemy ship along the grappling hook like pirates. During the climbing process, the sailors often bite the sailors' scimitars in their mouths or carry them on their backs. Once they jump onto the enemy ship along the grappling hook, they will pick up the sailors' scimitars from their mouths or backs and slash their opponents wantonly. However, before climbing onto the enemy ship from the grappling hook, during that climbing process, the sailors had no way to free their hands to fight. At this time, if you use a spear to stab the opponent's sailors will not be able to fight back and can only dodge. Therefore, under the suggestion of Marin, the Hamburg fleet prepared more than a dozen spears on each ship, which were specially used to stab the enemy soldiers who were climbing on their own ships. As the fleets of both sides got closer and closer, the sailors of the Hamburg fleet began to sweat gradually with their hands holding their weapons. "Captain, do you think we can beat the Danes?" A young Hamburg sailor asked nervously to the captain with a serious face beside him. "Don't doubt it, soldier, don't forget, we still have reinforcements." The captain replied seriously. But in fact, the captain was not sure. After all, the East Frisian fleet had never had a brilliant record, and he was not sure whether the East Frisian fleet could successfully complete the pincer attack mission. However, on the surface, he had to remain calm and give confidence to his sailors. Otherwise, there would be no need to fight this battle. When the front row warships of both sides were only about 200 meters apart, Alkinson gave a loud order, "Archers, prepare, rocket launch." Then, following the loud-voiced sailors on the Danish warships, the archers on the front row Danish warships put the arrows with grease on the heads on the torches and lit them, and then began to launch them at the front ships of the Hamburg fleet. The arrows with flaming fronts flew into the air like raindrops, and then dived towards the front warships of the Hamburg fleet. Of course, because the distance was too far, not all arrows could be shot 200 meters away. In the first round of rocket volleys, only a few arrows hit the Hamburg ships. However, the Hamburg fleet was not completely unprepared. At this time, many of the Hamburg sailors on the deck hid to avoid being shot by the opponent's arrows. Those who stayed on the deck mostly hid behind the cover. The archers on the Hamburg warships chose to hide temporarily and wait for the commander's order before coming out. Although not many enemies were killed, the rockets of the Danish archers were still thrown at the front row of Hamburg warships like raindrops. "Captain, the ship is on fire." A sailor who stayed on the deck to avoid the rain of arrows shouted on a Hamburg warship. "Don't panic, let the fire brigade take buckets to put out the fire." The captain commanded loudly. Then, several sailors immediately ran to the place where the small oak barrels filled with seawater were ignited and began to pour water on the burning part. Although the head of the rocket was dipped in grease, the amount was small, and the flames at the ignition point were quickly extinguished under the flushing of seawater. At this time, some sailors on the Danish warships had adjusted the trebuchets. After the adjustment, the Danish commander ordered loudly, "Catapults, ready, fire." So, a large number of stones began to whistle and fly towards the Hamburg warships. In fact, these were just Danish probing attacks. Because, in naval battles, the main ammunition of trebuchets is not stones, but fireballs. After all, in the age of sailing ships, warships were mostly made of wood. If the fireball can reach the enemy ship, it is very likely to set the enemy ship on fire. Therefore, the ammunition of the catapult in the naval battle is mainly stones wrapped in grease-covered linen. The linen outside the stone is covered with grease, much more than the grease on the head of the bow and arrow. If it hits the enemy ship, it is difficult to extinguish. Therefore, the previous throwing of stones was just the Danish catapults conducting calibration shooting. Although the maximum range of the catapult can reach 300 or 400 meters. However, in a real naval battle, the catapult will still start throwing fireballs at a distance of hundreds or even dozens of meters. Because it is easier to aim at this distance. It is difficult to hit the enemy ship at a distance of about 50 meters. At a distance of about 50 meters, the Danish front row of warships stopped moving forward. Then, the Danish catapults continued to calibrate. Finally, after many rounds, the experienced trebuchets of the Danish fleet found the right direction. When they saw the Danish trebuchets start to throw fireballs one after another, Rolf, the commander of the Hamburg Navy on the flagship, changed his face. "Quick, order the front row of warships to quickly approach, don't stop there and let the opponent aim at them with fireballs. Also, let the firefighting team prepare sand." The fireballs thrown by the trebuchets are different from rockets. Rockets have less grease and it is difficult to form a big fire. As long as you pour some water, the grease on the head of the rocket will be eliminated. But the fireballs thrown by the trebuchets are different. This kind of fireball has a lot of grease. If it hits the ship, it is easy to quickly ignite a fire. Moreover, if there is enough grease, pouring water may make the fire burn more vigorously. Therefore, this kind of fireball is usually extinguished with sand. Originally, Rolf was waiting for the Danes to engage in a boarding battle, but he didn't expect that the trebuchets of the Danish fleet were well trained and dared to concentrate on throwing large fireballs at a distance of 50 meters. If the opponent is allowed to aim at our warships so leisurely, there will be big problems. So Rolf had to order the front row of warships to approach. Once they get close, the opponent's trebuchets will lose their effect. After all, the trebuchet is an arc throw, and it is difficult to attack if it is too close. Seeing the Hamburg fleet actively moving forward, the commander of the Danish fleet, Alkinson, didn't care, whether it is long-range shooting or close combat, the Danish fleet will fully suppress the Hamburg people. Alkinson said confidently. When the front row of warships approached each other, the trebuchet lost its effect. But the Hamburg fleet did not really engage with the Danish warships, but approached very close and started firing rockets at the Danish warships. "Archers, light the rockets and shoot the Danish bastard ships." On the Hamburg warships, the captains shouted and commanded their archers to fire rockets at the Danish warships. Of course, the Danes did not show any weakness and also fired rockets back. At such a close distance, casualties finally began to increase greatly. "Ah, I was shot." Sailors kept screaming. But in this cruel battlefield, no one had time to pay attention to them. If possible, the injured ran to the ship's tower to find someone to help bandage. In this era, there were no doctors on board. Often, the wounded sailors were bandaged by the cooks and other ordinary people on board. Only those main warships would have a few professional doctors. Ordinary warships that were recruited were not equipped with doctors. At such a close distance, the archers stopped shooting and started firing in bursts. Therefore, the casualties were getting bigger and bigger. Moreover, there were more and more fire points on the ship. The fire brigade was also busy at this time, Fire Brigade, go to the bow to put out the fire. Fire Brigade, the left side of the ship's tower is on fire. Fire Brigade. In the case of mutual arrow shooting, the casualties of both sides were not much different. The Danish fleet had no advantage. So, the commander of the Danish fleet, Alkinson, ordered, "Get closer, boarding battle. Quick." So, the loudmouths on the Danish warships began to shout again. The Danish warships that received the order rushed forward one after another, and the grapplers also began to rotate the grapplers, ready to hook the Hamburg ships. When the two sides were very close, grapplers flew out from the Danish ships and hooked towards the Hamburg warships. The Danish sailors carrying sailor scimitars were also eager to try. "Quick, cut off those grapplers, don't let the Danish bastards come up." The commanders of the Hamburg fleet ordered one after another. The Hamburg people also knew that there were more experienced sailors in the Danish fleet than themselves. Therefore, not letting the other side sailors jump off the ship to help is the best choice. Because, when it comes to jumping off the ship and fighting, our side is definitely no match for the Danes. Moreover, their mission is just to hold back the Danish fleet, not to fight to the death. All the captains of the Hamburg fleet know that this time, the main attack is the warships of the East Frisian fleet, which are said to use artillery to attack the Danes. The Hamburg fleet is actually just bait. Of course, once the East Frisian fleet starts to attack the Danish fleet, the Hamburg fleet must also assist and hold the enemy back. Chapter 82 Reinforcements are coming. Quick, order the ships behind to encircle the Hamburg fleet from the left and right, and make sure to capture the ships in the front row. Seeing that the Danish warships had the upper hand, the commander of the Danish fleet, Alkinson, shouted hurriedly. Then, the Danish messengers conveyed the order in a loud voice. As a result, more than a dozen warships appeared on the left and right wings of the Danish fleet, trying to cooperate with the Danish warships in the front row to encircle the front row of the Hamburg fleet from the left and right. However, the people of Hamburg were not fools. Rolf saw a large number of ships appearing on the left and right sides of the Danish fleet, as if to surround the front row of warships, and he could not sit still. Go, send the same number of warships to intercept the Danish warships on both sides, and make sure that the warships in front are not surrounded. Then, the flag signal soldiers of the Hamburg fleet began to wave flags vigorously, and a large number of Hamburg warships also rushed out from the side to meet the Danish warships. At this time, in addition to the dozen warships in the head-on battle, and the dozen warships on both sides, the warships deployed by both sides reached 40 to 50. Then, the sea became a pot of porridge. Sailors on both sides were constantly injured by arrows, and a small number of Danish sailors jumped onto the Hamburg warships and began to hack and kill. However, the sailors of the Hamburg fleet had received simple training from the officers sent by Marin. There were more than a dozen spearmen on each ship, arranged in a dense formation, and stabbed the Danish sailors who tried to jump onto the Hamburg warships with spears. Therefore, although the Hamburg fleet was at a disadvantage, the fleet was not dangerous. Only one warship was on fire, and most of the members of the fire brigade were shot and killed by Danish archers, resulting in no one to put out the fire. In desperation, the captain had to abandon the ship with the surviving sailors, board the spare boat, and row back. The sailors who failed to catch up with the boat could only swim in the sea in the severe cold. The Hamburg people lost a warship. Alkinson, the commander of the Danish fleet, saw this and shouted happily. However, he didn't know that 40 warships quietly appeared behind the Danish fleet. Kidd, the commander of the East Frisian fleet, was on the sea 20 kilometers away at this time, climbing up the mast and watching the battle with a telescope. In fact, the East Frisian fleet could intervene at this time, because the Danish and Hamburg fleets have been fully in contact. However, Kidd was not in a hurry. "Commander, should we attack?" asked Captain Lert, who also climbed up the mast and watched the battle with a telescope. "No hurry, let them fight for a while," Kidd said lightly. In fact, Kidd is also a wretched guy. Otherwise, Marin would not have appointed him as the commander of the fleet. At the beginning, Kidd was a captain of the West Frisian Noble Republic and surrendered after being ambushed by Marin's men. Marin didn't trust him at first, but because he lacked talents, he had to force Kidd to lead the naval fleet. Later, Marin discovered that Kidd was a wretched guy and had a talent for naval command. The most important thing is that he and Marin are the same kind of people, both of whom are unwilling to suffer losses. Every time he practices tactics, Kidd always cruises with his fleet, looking for the right opportunity, and never attacks easily. Once he attacks, he specifically aims at the opponent's weaknesses. It is not nonsense to say that he is as cunning as a fox. Moreover, Kidd likes artillery battles very much and does not like the traditional jumping ship gang tactics. Marin is very precious to the warships in his hands, so he is naturally reluctant to use them to engage in boarding battles with others. Therefore, Kidd's characteristic of liking artillery battles makes Marin very valued, so he promoted him to be the commander of the fleet. Before this expedition, Kidd also talked to Marin. When talking about the best time to attack, Kidd believed that the Danish fleet and the Hamburg fleet should be allowed to fight for a while longer. In this way, both sides have suffered great losses. If he attacks again, he can not only increase the chances of victory, but also secretly weaken the strength of the ally Hamburg. After all, Hamburg is now an ally of East Frisia, but the future is not certain. Moreover, while Hamburg's losses increase, the Danes will not be easy, and they will definitely suffer corresponding losses. When the East Frisian fleet appears after they have suffered certain losses, it will not only be easier to attack Denmark, but also weaken Hamburg's strength silently. After listening to Kidd's point of view, Marin greatly appreciated it. Therefore, the full command of the fleet this time naturally fell on Kidd. Even though Columbus, as a baron, had a higher status than Kidd, he had to accept Kidd's command. More than an hour later, the battle between Denmark and Hamburg became more intense. At this time, hundreds of people on both sides had been injured. 2 more warships of Hamburg were burned by the Danes, and the Danes also lost a warship. Alkinson couldn't wait any longer and began to order the entire fleet to press forward, trying to surround the opponent with numerical advantage. When the warships behind Denmark pressed forward one after another, Kidd finally put down the telescope and shouted to the flag signalman below, "Order to attack." Then, the East Frisian fleet, which had been hiding 20 kilometers northwest of the Danish fleet, raised its sails and began to sail southeast to encircle Denmark's rear. The reason why it was not directly north of the Danish fleet was to consider the characteristics of the artillery. If the artillery shells were fired directly behind the Danish fleet, once they missed, they might pass over the Danish warships and accidentally injure the Hamburg warships. Therefore, it was safest to cut in from the northwest and fire the shells to the southeast. When the East Frisian fleet appeared 10 kilometers northwest of the battlefield, a sharp-eyed Danish sailor finally discovered it. Report to the captain, a large number of ships were found in the northwest. Soon, this report was passed to Alkinson by the loud-voiced messenger. Northwest? Where is the fleet? However, because of the long distance and the Danes did not have telescopes, they naturally could not judge and could only wait. However, for safety reasons, Alkinson ordered some of the warships that had been pressed forward to participate in the encirclement of the Hamburg fleet to withdraw to guard against the fleet of unknown origin. Hamburg was already a little overwhelmed at this time. After all, the Danish fleet was not only stronger, but also more numerous. But after seeing the shadow in the northwest, all the captains of the Hamburg warships who knew the inside story shouted excitedly, "Our reinforcements are coming! Our reinforcements are coming!" The originally low-spirited Hamburg sailors immediately boosted their morale when they heard that reinforcements had arrived, and they drove the Danish sailors who jumped on board off the ship. Chapter 83, The Battle of Jutland, Part 2. When the East Frisian fleet appeared at a distance of several kilometers, Alkinson was dumbfounded to find that dozens of ships of the other side were actually flying the flag of Lübeck, Denmark's mortal enemy. Could it be that the fleet defending the home was defeated by the Lübeck people? Alkinson felt a little guilty. Oh no, quickly order a retreat and don't get entangled with the Hamburg people. At the critical moment, Alkinson decisively ordered the recovery of the formation, intending to guard against the Lübeck fleet behind him. However, it was too late. Because many Danish warships had rushed to the side of the Hamburg fleet and were far away from the main formation. It was impossible for the Danish fleet, which basically relied on shouting for communication, to notify the warships that were deep in front. Therefore, in the end, only more than 20 warships that were not too far forward surrounded Alkinson's flagship, Copenhagen. However, these ships, because of their small hulls, were all small boats of more than 100 tons. The big warships all rushed to the front. When the East Frisian fleet approached the Danish fleet 1 kilometer, it suddenly changed its formation. The 23 warships in the front were all arranged in a dense horizontal formation, facing the Danish fleet from the side. As for the 17 carracks led by Columbus, they temporarily covered the 2 wings and did not participate in the bombardment. Moreover, the cannons equipped by those carracks were only 6 pounds at most, and many were small cannons of 2 or 3 pounds. Even if they participated in the bombardment, they could not penetrate the side of the Danish warships, so it was better to save ammunition as much as possible. One by one, the cannons stretched out their heads, and the gun ports on the lower level also opened the windows through the hinges. The artillerymen of the East Frisian fleet began to load the powder and ammunition in an orderly manner, and then pushed the gun carriage to the front and aimed at the Danish warships. Alkinson was a little puzzled, not knowing what the fleet behind him flying the Lübeck flag wanted to do. Only Rolf, the commander of the Hamburg fleet who knew some artillery information, smiled. He knew that the artillery of the East Frisian fleet was about to show its power. In fact, the East Frisian fleet did not open fire immediately, but continued to maneuver several hundred meters southward, and only started to fire when it was only 500 meters away from the Danish fleet. Ready. Fire. Following the commander's order, a total of 310 artillery pieces on one side of the 23 East Frisian warships in the front row roared together, boom boom boom, boom boom boom, boom boom boom. On the sea, all the sounds were covered by the rumbling of artillery. At this time, the command of the Danish fleet had been completely paralyzed. Because the Danes commanded by shouting. But under the cover of the sound of artillery, no matter how loud the shout was, it was difficult to be heard. Alkinson kept ordering the messenger to notify the warships in front to withdraw. However, the order could no longer be conveyed. Moreover, the Hamburg people, who were in high spirits, did not allow the Danish warships to retreat. Originally, the Danes hooked the Hamburg warships with grappling hooks and wanted to board the ships. However, now the situation is reversed. The sailors on the Hamburg warships took out the grappling hooks and hooked the Danish warships to prevent them from leaving the battlefield. Some strong men on the ships even threw the iron anchors used to stop the ships directly onto the Danish warships that wanted to escape. The iron anchors were heavy, and they were tied with iron chains, not ropes, so it was difficult for the Danes to cut them off. The grappling hooks on the anchors hooked the side of the ship, making it impossible for the Danish warships to escape. How powerful are the 310 18-pound and 12-pound heavy guns? Although the hit rate was less than 10%, it was enough. In each round of salvo, nearly 30 iron ball shells hit the Danish warships facing the front row of the East Frisian fleet. The sad thing is that because they had not yet entered the artillery era, the Danish cog sailing ships did not reinforce the hull to prevent shelling. Therefore, when some shells happened to hit the sides of several Danish warships, the shells effortlessly tore open the wooden boards on the sides of the Danish warships and penetrated them. Then, seawater poured in. Those unlucky Danish warships also began to slowly tilt and sink. Alkinson, the commander of the Danish fleet, was a little dumbfounded. He never expected that the dozens of warships on the opposite side were actually using artillery. According to the sound of the guns just now, he estimated that the opposite fleet had at least 200 artillery pieces firing at the same time. Moreover, the caliber of the opposite artillery was not small, otherwise it would not be able to penetrate the side of the warship. So, he was terrified. The whole army retreats. Alkinson finally gave the order. But when he gave the order, 5 small boats of more than 100 tons near the outermost edge of the East Frisian fleet had been sunk. After all, these cog sailing ships were not designed to be anti-bombardment, and the side was too thin. As long as the iron ball hit the side, it would be penetrated in 9 out of 10 cases. Because it was a total retreat, the Danish messenger no longer used shouting at this time, but directly took out the horn and blew it. Woo woo dash, the long horn sound spread immediately. Although the warships in front did not hear it because of the sound of the guns, dozens of Danish warships behind heard it. So, the Danish warships behind began to desperately disengage from the battle and tried to retreat. The Hamburgers were like chicken blood, and they just wouldn't let them go. Various grappling hooks and anchors greeted the Danish warships and pestered them. In the end, the Danish warships that successfully withdrew from the battle, including those that had withdrawn before, totaled only 50, less than half of the total number of 120 Danish warships. Alkinson had been frightened by the bombardment of the East Frisian fleet. Just now, an 18-pound shell, due to the shooting angle, passed the Danish warships in the front row, whistled through the sky, and flew over Alkinson's flagship, Copenhagen, and directly smashed the head of a sailor who was observing on the mast. Suddenly, a stream of hot blood spurted down from the mast, mixed with minced meat, and covered Alkinson's face. So, Alkinson was frightened. In fear, Alkinson first led the 50 warships behind him and retreated directly northward along the western coastline of Jutland. Because the East Frisian fleet came from the northwest, there was still a way to escape to the north. As for the more than 60 warships behind him, he could no longer take care of them. But how could Kidd let him escape? So Kidd order Columbus's Clark fleet to block the enemy's way to the north. In addition, let Columbus come to my warship and command with me. Kidd thought that Columbus was Marin's favorite and could not be harmed. Therefore, he asked Columbus' Clark fleet to intercept the Danish fleet, but Columbus himself took a small boat to the flagship Hoffman No. 1 and accompanied Kidd to command. After Kidd gave the order, 17 Clark warships formed a dense formation and blocked the passage of the Danish fleet to the north. With no hope of retreating north, Alkinson had no choice but to order the fleet to maneuver westward. However, this would put the Danish fleet right in the range of the East Frisian fleet's artillery fire. So, the rumbling of artillery sounded again. In one encounter, 3 small warships of the Danish fleet were sunk. In anger, Alkinson ordered, "Ramp the enemy fleet. Engage in a boarding battle." Since escaping was so dangerous and difficult, Alkinson decided to give it a try, get close to the enemy ships, and then have a boarding battle. But as the distance got closer, the hit rate of the East Frisian fleet's artillery became higher and higher. As a result, at a distance of only 500 meters, 7 Danish ships were sunk, the masts of 13 ships were broken, and they lost their maneuverability. When they got closer, a row of musketeers appeared on the side of the warships of the East Frisian fleet. Moreover, these musketeers were all wearing helmets and breastplate armor. After a round of shooting, the archers on the Danish warships suffered casualties, and many were killed on the spot. After all, the East Frisian musketeers used the musket with a projectile weighing 50 grams. As long as they were hit by a 50-gram lead bullet, they would definitely not recover, and the death and injury rate was extremely high. The archers on the Danish warships did cause damage to the East Frisian musketeers. However, most of the arrows were shot into their arms or legs. Only one unlucky guy who was shot in the throat died on the spot. The others were just injured. The East Frisian army now uses alcohol and boiled gauze. As long as they are not hit by lead bullets, ordinary arrow wounds are still easy to deal with. The Danish sailors who tried to crawl to the East Frisian warships through the grappling hooks were directly killed by the sailors of the East Frisian fleet with muskets and fell into the sea. "Charge, charge, as long as you rush to the other ship, the musketeers will let you cut them." Alkinson shouted on the Danish flagship, Copenhagen. He knew the musketeers. Once this type of soldier was close to them, they would be like sheep and be cut and killed. So he ordered the sailors to crawl over quickly. As long as they were close to those musketeers, the Danes would have the advantage. Unfortunately, Alkinson had lost his mind at this time. His crazy shouting finally attracted the attention of the East Frisian sailors who were shooting with muskets. A sharpshooter among the sailors named Nathan saw a Danish officer-like man on the deck of a large Danish warship 50 meters away jumping and shouting. Although he didn't understand Danish, Nathan knew that the other party must be a big shot, and the other party was commanding the battle. So, Nathan raised his musket and aimed at the thigh of the Danish big shot opposite, intending to make him lose his ability to move, so that they could capture prisoners and make him quiet down. After all, if you are injured, you can only cry out in pain, and you can't command. But what he didn't expect was that because Nathan was 50 meters away from Alkinson, although he aimed at the thigh, the bullet flew over and hit Alkinson's neck directly, piercing Alkinson's neck directly, revealing a terrifying big blood hole. Alkinson covered his neck in disbelief, and slowly fell down. Nathan was also scared and at a loss, because he deliberately shot and killed a noble lord. According to the current rules, civilians who deliberately murdered noble lords would be hanged. Even on the battlefield, civilians deliberately aiming at noble lords is unforgivable. Of course, he didn't know that his big boss Marin would definitely forgive his behavior and even reward him. Of course, the reward must be private. However, he looked at the people around him, and it seemed that no one noticed that he deliberately aimed at Alkinson. So he pretended to be calm and continued to reload, then aimed at the sailor on the ship in front who was trying to climb along the grappling hook and shot. The Danes were furious. Lord Alkinson was killed. Lord Alkinson was killed. The news spread quickly, and the Danish sailors who were still trying to climb the enemy ship heard the news one after another. So, the morale of the Danes collapsed immediately. A Danish captain named Harrison saw that his commander was killed in battle. He was timid and immediately ordered a white flag to be raised. Then, the East Frisian sailors on the opposite side of the ship also stopped firing their muskets and sent people to take over the ship. At this time, the Danish army was obviously still an ancient army, without the strict model of modern armies. Therefore, after the commander was killed in battle, many people chose to surrender directly. When Harrison's white flag was hung out, other ships followed suit and chose to hang white flags to surrender. In this way, more than half of the dozens of Danish warships that rushed over surrendered. Several stubborn warships were also besieged. When approaching, the power of the artillery was maximized. Kidd commanded several warships to stick to the enemy ships and directly sunk the stubborn Danish warships. After controlling the surrendered Danish warships, Kidd ordered the caravels to come and receive prisoners and warships. Kidd led 23 main warships and continued to move forward, outflanking those Danish warships that were still entangled with the Hamburg fleet. Seeing that the flagship and the warships around the flagship had hoisted white flags, those Danish warships that were still entangled with Hamburg also lost their fighting spirit. As a result, the remaining Danish warships also chose to surrender. Only a dozen ships were still resisting, but they were all approached by Kidd's warships and sunk close to them. In this way, the naval battle finally ended with the victory of the Allied fleet. The Danish fleet had 29 warships sunk and 20 damaged. Among them, most of the sunken Danish warships were sunk by the artillery of the East Frisian fleet after approaching. And only one ship of the East Frisian fleet had its upper deck burned by the Danish rockets. The other ships were not lost, but only dozens of sailors were injured. As for Hamburg, it was a bit miserable. A total of thousands of sailors were killed and injured, and 8 ships were burned and 11 warships were burned. But no matter what, the coalition forces won a great victory this time. Moreover, according to the agreement, the more than 80 warships captured this time will be divided by Hamburg and Lübeck. In this way, the losses of the Hamburgers will be quickly made up, and even strengthened. After all, most of the captured Danish warships are over 200 tons, which are large ships in this era. The Danish flagship, Copenhagen, is a large warship with a displacement of up to 500 tons, which is quite valuable. Next, it's time to clean up the battlefield. Kidd handed over all the captured warships and Danish sailors to the Hamburgers. Then, he took the fleet back to Emden to replenish ammunition. Among them, the armed merchant ship No. 2509, whose upper deck was burned, needed to be repaired and could not participate in the next naval battle. Hamburg also needed to absorb and digest the results of this battle. Those damaged ships also had to be towed back for repair. The two sides agreed to regroup in a month and attack the Øresund Strait together. Hamburg sent someone to notify the Lübeck fleet and set a time for the 3 fleets to besiege the port of Copenhagen together, striving to destroy the remaining 80 warships in Denmark. Chapter 84, Rumors and Rumor Refuting. Although the fleet of the East Frisian state returned to the naval port near Emden in a low-key manner for repairs, Hamburg was not low-key. Although 10 ships were lost in the naval battle, in a blink of an eye, the Hamburgers obtained more than 80 warships surrendered by Denmark, which was a huge profit. When the Hamburg fleet returned to Cuxhaven, the outer port of Hamburg, with a large number of captured warships and Danish sailors, it caused a huge sensation. Many people in Hamburg knew about this expedition to Denmark. After all, Hamburg launched a general mobilization throughout the country and recruited a large number of merchant ships and sailors to serve. It was impossible to keep it secret. However, the people of Hamburg were not optimistic about this war. After all, everyone knew that Denmark was strong at sea. If they had joined forces with Lübeck early, there might still be hope of victory, just like the great naval battle in the 14th century. However, the Danes were obviously not fools and would not allow the Hamburg fleet to join the Lübeck fleet. Therefore, most people in Hamburg were pessimistic. Unexpectedly, the fleet met the main force of the Danish fleet less than 10 days after its departure. Moreover, the Danish fleet was completely defeated, and a large number of warships and sailors were captured, which made the people of Hamburg excited. As a result, the sales of beer in the taverns in the main city of Hamburg and the outer port of Cuxhaven increased greatly. At this time, the sailors who participated in this naval battle were warmly welcomed by all the people of Hamburg. In the tavern, as long as they stated that they had participated in this naval battle, the Hamburg sailors would be invited to drink beer by many people. Of course, it was not for nothing. While drinking, they had to tell the curious citizens about the exciting experience of the naval battle. And precisely, those bottom-level sailors like to brag about their sailing and fighting experiences the most. Even if there is no wonderful past, they will brag about a wonderful experience. Not to mention that this naval battle is really exciting and wonderful. Therefore, the taverns in Hamburg and Cuxhaven became the special places for the Hamburg sailors who went on this expedition to brag. People kept inviting them to drink, and they also boasted about the wonderful process of the naval battle over and over again. Most of the sailors were good at boasting. They were only responsible for containing the Danish fleet, but they boasted that they killed all around and scared the Danes. But not every sailor liked to brag. Some sailors were more honest and honestly pointed out the mission of the Hamburg fleet this time, to hold back the Danish fleet and let the East Frisian fleet attack from behind. And the spectacular scene of the East Frisian fleet, firing thousands of cannons, gradually spread from the Hamburg tavern. You know, Hamburg is the second largest Hanseatic city in Germany, where merchants gather and people from all over the world. Soon, the news spread. According to the sailor's description, East Frisian used about 200 or 300 heavy artillery this time. This is not the most important thing. The important thing is that those heavy artillery are made of expensive copper. Each cannon is said to weigh more than 2,000 pounds, and 300 heavy cannons are worth 40,000 pounds of silver, equivalent to more than 400,000 gold coins. Then, the rumor changed. Everyone began to spread the word that Count Marin of East Frisia had discovered a huge Viking treasure, which contained countless gold and filled the houses. Therefore, Marin had the money to hire tens of thousands of troops and equip the warships with expensive copper-heavy cannons. The rumor soon spread to Gluckstadt, the capital of the Principality of Holstein, not far from Hamburg. At this time, Marin had just led his army to capture the royal palace in Gluckstadt. It was still the familiar formula. Doni Tsrui, who was mistaken for Dong Tsuanrui by Marin, blew up the gate of the Gluckstadt palace by burying gunpowder barrels. Then, the shield soldiers swarmed in with a large number of East Frisian warriors, quickly defeated the stubborn Holstein defenders, and captured a large number of local nobles trapped in the palace. Marin was originally in a good mood after conquering the stubborn defenders of the Principality of Holstein and capturing a large number of local nobles. But when he heard this rumor, he was in a bad mood. This rumor is simply putting Marin on the fire. If it is rumored that Marin has a way to make money and makes a lot of money, perhaps no one will be jealous. That is Marin's ability. However, if it is rumored that Marin started his career because he discovered a treasure, that would not be good. Unexpected wealth always makes people envious, jealous and hate. Just like in later generations, no one will be jealous of Jack Ma's wealth, because he has obtained his huge wealth through wisdom and hard work. But there are definitely people who envy those lucky people who won 5 million or even tens of millions of prizes, because these people made a windfall. Therefore, many winners of the jackpot have to use stockings to mask their faces, just to avoid being targeted by someone with a heart and being robbed. In the same way, if Marin earns a lot of money through his own efforts, although some people will be jealous, it will not be much. But if it is determined that he made a fortune because of some treasure, then he will be hated. Maybe someone will secretly covet his wealth. Marin wanted to cut the person who made up this news into pieces, because it was clearly hurting him. In fact, the person who spread this news was indeed pitting Marin. And this businessman named Widest was a spy from the Duchy of Saxony. As a trading capital, Hamburg naturally has people from all over the country. The Duchy of Saxony will naturally have many businessmen come to Hamburg to do business. Moreover, many Saxon merchants not only do business here, but also help the Duke of Saxony to find out information. After hearing the rumors of this naval battle in the tavern, the clever Widest decided to use the rumors to pit Marin. After all, the East Frisian state is the victim of the Duchy of Saxony. Then, the rumor that Marin discovered the huge treasure of the Viking pirates spread out. Because Marin paid attention to blocking the news, only the nobles in the country knew that he was rich, and not many people outside knew about it. Moreover, the East Frisian state only has one open port, Emden. Few foreigners are involved in other regions. Therefore, it is not easy for other countries to obtain intelligence about the East Frisian state. Even those big-mouthed sailors, because they were directly selected by Marin from the young Frisian fishermen and strictly trained, generally do not talk nonsense. Because, when training in the sailor school, keeping your mouth shut is an important principle. But Hamburg is different. It is a free trade capital, where people are of all kinds and from all over the place. Sailors are also more accustomed to going to the pub to drink beer and brag after each voyage. Here, rumors always spread quickly. Marin knew very well that if he didn't refute the rumors, he might be targeted. Then, when the enemy's spies discovered his salt-boiling centers on Baltrum Island and Texel Island, his weaknesses would be exposed to the public. Because it was on the seashore, the salt-boiling centers were easily attacked by pirates or enemy ships. Therefore, Marin was unwilling to have his money bag discovered anyway. Therefore, Marin decided to dispel the rumor immediately. So, Marin found the scout leader Saul who was with the army and asked him to send hundreds of scouts to the taverns in several prosperous Hanseatic cities such as Hamburg and Bremen to spread the news that the copper used to cast cannons in East Frisia was purchased from India. In order to clear himself of the suspicion of discovering treasure, Marin decided to expose the secret of the low copper price in India. So people learned that the copper price in India was only a fraction of that in Europe. Very cheap. The reason why the East Frisian county was equipped with so many copper cannons was because they bought several ships of copper back. As for why Marin's merchant ships did not purchase spices in large quantities in India, the reason was also very simple: Spain did not allow it. After the news spread, many people suddenly realized it. In particular, many big businessmen who had been to Spain to purchase spices knew that this was indeed the case. Those spice merchants who had been to Spain had indeed heard in Spain that the Spanish kings had monopolized the Indian spice trade. However, Marin Hoffman, as the Spanish Count of Wilderness, was not allowed to purchase spices in large quantities, so he had to purchase a lot of copper. Unexpectedly, these coppers were all cast into cannons. But what Marin didn't expect was that because of this rumor busting, the news that Marin sent Columbus to lead the Spanish fleet and take them to India was also made public. Then, Marin was hated by another maritime power, Portugal. Portugal has always believed that Columbus was assigned by the Spanish royal family to discover the Indian route. However, through this rumor-busting incident, they discovered that Columbus was assigned by Marin, Count of East Frisia, to discover India. Then, Columbus was sent to the Spanish fleet as a guide to compete with the Portuguese for business. So, Marin was completely hated by the Portuguese. Now, if Marin dared to sail through Portuguese waters, if the Portuguese knew about it, they would definitely send out all their warships to destroy him, or even capture him and cut him into pieces. Chapter 85, Influence on the Way of Naval Warfare. Just as rumors were spreading, an important piece of information was put in front of people, that is, the way of naval warfare has changed. Before, in Europe, only the Portuguese were the first to equip warships with a large number of artillery, and they were ahead of the world in this regard. And Portugal's neighbor Spain, right next to Portugal, naturally followed suit and copied the Portuguese. And France, because of its leading artillery technology in Europe, also equipped warships with artillery. However, the French do not attach importance to the ocean, and the number of warships is pitifully small. Therefore, even if equipped with artillery, the navy is not up to the table. Therefore, at present, in addition to East Frisia, only Portugal and Spain, two major maritime powers in Europe, are equipped with artillery on a large scale. Other maritime powers, such as Denmark, the Republic of Venice, or the Hanseatic League, are still in the era of boarding battles. And Britain, the later maritime overlord, has no fleet at the moment. The main reason is that the King of England is too poor and has no money to equip the fleet, let alone equip the ship with expensive bronze artillery. It was not until Henry VIII took the opportunity of the Reformation to confiscate Catholic property in England that he had a lot of money and began to build large warships equipped with hundreds of cannons. Of course, in the original history, all of this happened after the Battle of Gao in 1509. Because the Portuguese defeated the Indian Combined Fleet, which had 2,000 warships of various sizes, with only 19 warships equipped with cannons, shocking the world. Since then, European countries have also begun to equip warships with cannons. Moreover, the reason why the early cannons were not large in caliber and the mainstream was 6-pound cannons was not that larger cannons could not be made, but that the cost was too high. Because the current price ratio of silver to copper is 1 to 15. A 6-pound cannon weighs thousands of pounds. And thousands of pounds of copper are worth 66.7 pounds of silver, equivalent to 5.56 pounds of gold, or 708 gold coins. If it is a 12-pound copper cannon, the cost will double. Therefore, countries with poor finances cannot afford it at all. Moreover, before seeing the tangible benefits, most countries are unwilling to invest so much. In fact, the Portuguese have only tried to promote 10-pound guns and 12-pound breech-loading bronze guns. However, due to financial constraints, they have not been promoted on a large scale. But since Vasco da Gama opened the Indian route, the Portuguese have also benefited greatly and earned hundreds of thousands of gold coins. You know, the Portuguese have been engaged in trade on the African coast for decades, and they can only transport back half a ton of gold, which is about 140,000 gold coins, every year. The income from Vasco da Gama's voyage to India is several times more than the trade on the west coast of Africa, which immediately swelled the pockets of the grapes and the royal family. The Portuguese were very dissatisfied with Spain's food-grabbing behavior, and even threatened to annihilate the Spanish fleet. However, the two kings of Spain are not vegetarians, and they have been on demand by Marin. Therefore, the two kings of Spain threatened in turn, if you attack my fleet, I will surround Lisbon from land, and even destroy Portugal. So Portugal choked. And can you talk about some rules? I talked to you about hegemony at sea, why did I talk about land? Isn't this cheating? However, the Portuguese had no choice but to surrender. After all, Portugal was a scumbag on land. It is certain that the Portuguese royal family, using the profits from da Gama's Indian trade, replaced a batch of larger artillery on the warships. These artillery played a huge role in the Battle of Gao. But it is only 1503 now, and the Battle of Gao has not yet occurred. In the Battle of Jutland, Marin used artillery first, and his moves were extraordinary. He used more than 300 heavy artillery and sank many Danish warships. You know, Danish warships are not those small boats of the Indian Combined Fleet. Many small boats of the Indian Combined Fleet are simply large boats rowed by manpower. Even a 6-pound gun can sink them steadily. Compared with the ships of the Indian Combined Fleet, the Danish warships are all large ships and more difficult to damage. Therefore, dozens of ships were sunk at once, which absolutely shocked Europe. Before, the sign of victory in European naval battles was that the sailors wiped out all the enemies on the opponent's ship through boarding battles, or simply burned the opponent's ships with rockets. However, the number of enemy ships destroyed was very small. But Marin's East Frisian fleet sank dozens of Danish warships at once, which was completely beyond the expectations of the Europeans. So, this tactic of using heavy artillery to bombard enemy ships became popular. Artillery also became popular. Now, many visionary people in the tavern are discussing one thing, that is, whether future naval battles will fully enter the artillery era. Debates are unfolding in various taverns, and many acquaintances and strangers have fierce debates on whether artillery battles will replace boarding battles. Because they drank, it was inevitable that everyone was emotional when arguing, and even fought because of different ideas. After all, it is not so easy for a new thing to replace an old thing, and there will always be diehards who will resist. However, in the Hamburg Parliament and the Lübeck Parliament, the Hanseatic members here reached a consensus. The Hanseatic League will also be equipped with a large number of artillery in the future. Because the Hanseatic League is developed by trade, and maritime trade is their lifeline, especially the one king and one queen in the two Hanseatic Leagues of Lübeck and Hamburg. If their navy lags behind the times, it is easy to be beaten. Once the maritime power is lost, the interests of the two cities' maritime trade will not be preserved. It can even be said that the two Hanseatic cities will be in a desperate situation. Therefore, the two Hanseatic core cities are most sensitive to the changes in naval warfare, fearing that they will lag behind the times. Before, in fact, the parliaments of the two cities had heard about the news that the Portuguese equipped warships with a large number of artillery. But at that time, people in the two cities didn't care much. After all, the Portuguese equipped warships with artillery, but they had never proved that the use of artillery must be better than traditional naval warfare methods. But this time it was different. The people of Hamburg saw with their own eyes that Marin's East Frisian fleet used rows of heavy artillery to sink dozens of Danish warships in the vast ocean, which gave them a great visual impact. Therefore, the Hamburg Parliament took the lead in making a decision to equip ships with artillery on a large scale in the future. Moreover, in the future, when manufacturing warships, the sides must be reinforced to avoid being easily penetrated by enemy artillery. As for Lübeck, the relationship with Hamburg was originally very close, and the distance between them was not far. After learning that Hamburg had made such a decision, they also quickly made the same decision, gradually equipping the navy with artillery, and in the future manufacture of new warships, focusing on strengthening the sides to avoid being easily penetrated by shells. As for how to manufacture warships, it is obvious that the East Frisian state has ready-made experience. Therefore, Hamburg immediately made a request to Marin, who was still staying in Gluckstadt, the capital of the Principality of Holstein, in the name of an ally, hoping to obtain the warship drawings of the East Frisian state. Where would Marin be willing to give them the warship drawings? That was the East Frisian Navy's treasure. So, after thinking it over again and again, Marin ordered to hand over the design drawings of the 250-class armed merchant ship to Hamburg. Anyway, this kind of ship is more advanced than the cog sailing ship. In this way, through a shocking naval battle, Marin successfully influenced the Europeans' choice of naval warfare. Hamburg, which also participated in the Battle of Jutland, took the lead in choosing change, followed by Lübeck. Moreover, as the news of the naval battle spreads, more and more European countries will choose to follow suit and develop naval guns and new warships with reinforced sides. History has been changed, and the Europeans' naval warfare methods will also be greatly changed. From now on, the first naval battle in which artillery became the main weapon of naval warfare will change from the Battle of Joe to the Battle of Jutland involving East Frisia, Hamburg and Denmark. Chapter 86 The Army heads north. Gluckstadt, the capital of the Duchy of Holstein, has been here for some time with Marin's army. During this period, in addition to conquering the palace where a group of local nobles led by Prime Minister Bentheim were trapped, Marin also reorganized the 25,000 troops gathered here. Not only these troops, but also the 5,000 civilians in Hamburg serving the 5,000 mercenaries and the 10,000 civilians brought by Marin, the entire team size reached 40,000. Such a large-scale team is indeed troublesome to command. So Marin simply stopped for a while, mainly for the integration of the entire team. The most important thing is to incorporate the 5,000 mercenaries and 5,000 civilians in Hamburg into the system of his own army. So Marin asked Schwartz and other generals to conduct assault training for the 5,000 Hamburg mercenaries and 5,000 Hamburg civilians, mainly conducting simple Q training for them, and repeatedly emphasizing the issue of discipline. In particular, the 5,000 Hamburg mercenaries, probably because of old habits, always wanted to get rich by robbing in the captured city of Gluckstadt. This old habit is basically a common bad habit of mercenaries in this era. Within a few days, the patrols sent by the East Frisian army prevented hundreds of cases of robbery by Hamburg mercenaries. In desperation, Marin had to set up a military court to specifically punish those mercenaries who did not listen to advice and repeatedly emphasized the importance of discipline. In fact, the Duchy of Holstein was to be divided into the territory of Lübeck, the Hamburg industry, and Marin did not care too much whether the local area was destroyed by mercenaries. However, the Duchy of Schleswig, which was to be attacked next, was planned to be assigned to his own territory, and Marin would never allow bad phenomena to happen there. Therefore, while still in the territory of the Duchy of Holstein, Marin planned to rectify the military discipline and then march north again. As for whether the Danes would take advantage of this period to strengthen their strength, Marin did not care. Because even if the Danes strengthened their strength, they would only recruit more militia. How is the combat effectiveness of the militia? It is difficult to form combat effectiveness within a few days, and at most they can only be regarded as cannon fodder. Marin is confident enough to crush all enemies who try to stand in front of him. At the same time, after the palace prime minister Bentheim was captured, Marin forced him to issue an order, ordering other cities in the Principality of Holstein to surrender unconditionally. Bentheim originally wanted to refuse to cooperate, but Marin tied Bentheim's son and the most beloved grandson in front of him. After a disagreement, he pretended to throw Bentheim's most beloved grandson into the boiling pot, and threatened to force Bentheim to drink the broth cooked by his grandson. Bentheim was frightened by Marin's brutalism. In desperation, he chose to compromise and personally issued an order to order other towns in the principality to surrender unconditionally. In fact, Marin was just trying to scare Bentheim. If Marin really boiled Bentheim's grandson and forced Bentheim to drink the broth, it is estimated that Marin would soon become a famous cruel figure in Europe and leave a bad name for all ages, just like King Zhou who forced King I of Zhou, Jichang, to eat the meat soup made by his son Boikao. After Bentheim's order was issued, it still had some effect. About half of the subordinate small cities chose to obey. Besides, even if they did not obey, they did not have the confidence to resist the coalition forces. In addition, with Bentheim's order, they also had a step down. Since someone took the blame, why did they still fight? But Neumünster, the third largest city in the Principality of Holstein after Gluckstadt and Kiel, counting Hamburg and Lübeck, it should be the fifth largest, chose to resist stubbornly. Neumünster is located in the center of the Principality of Holstein and is the central hub of land transportation in the Principality of Holstein from east to west and north to south. The local garrison commander, Hamilson, was originally a Dane. He was sent to the Duchy of Holstein as a garrison commander as a confidant of King Hans. Therefore, this person is a die-hard fan of King Hans of Denmark. Moreover, his family is not here, but in Zealand. Therefore, he has no worries, so he chose to resist to the end. In other cities, many are dominated by local nobles. In order to allow the family to continue and not be destroyed, most of them chose to surrender. Anyway, with the order document of Prime Minister Bentheim, they can also step down. Even if King Hans of Denmark takes back the Duchy of Holstein in the future, they can also pass the blame with the endorsement of Bentheim's order document. Therefore, they chose to surrender instead of resisting. Therefore, if Marin wanted to conquer the entire Duchy of Holstein, he had to capture Neumünster, a major town on the way north, and remove this nail. After several days of Q training, the originally unruly Hamburg mercenaries were finally beaten honestly by the veterans under Marin. So now they barely obeyed orders and followed commands. Feeling that the time was ripe, Marin continued to go north with 25,000 troops. Because he had 20,000 troops, accounting for the majority of the coalition forces, Marin naturally became the commander of this coalition. Along the way, the army was invincible. For the manners of the small nobles in the countryside of the Duchy of Holstein, Marin adopted the strategy of letting go if they surrender, and conquering if they don't surrender. Most of the nobles were not fools. Seeing tens of thousands of troops pressing over, they all chose to surrender. Only a small number of knight families, probably influenced by the glory of the knights, did not surrender, but chose to resist. However, these knight families are often poor and can't even build a castle. How can they have the strength to resist 25,000 troops? At this time, Marin chose to send out 5,000 new recruits under his command to practice with the manners of these rebellious nobles, to train their courage and combat skills. Along the way, Marin commanded the recruits to remove more than 20 manors that refused to surrender, killing them in a bloody battle. The wealth of these manors was naturally confiscated by Marin. And the 5,000 new recruits under his command also gradually grew up in many battles. Although there were some losses, Marin believed that it was worth it. Soldiers who have not experienced fighting cannot be regarded as qualified soldiers. And attacking those rebellious manners is not difficult, which is suitable for training new recruits. In this way, after conquering 30 stubborn knights' manners in a row, Marin led his army and finally arrived at the city of Neumünster, and surrounded the city. After that, Marin transferred more than a dozen short-barreled 18-pound Karen heavy artillery that were transported with the baggage troops, and focused on the north gate of Neumünster city, and carried out continuous bombardment. In order to avoid unnecessary casualties, Marin did not choose to attack. Because the forced attack method of climbing the city wall can easily cause huge casualties to our side. Therefore, Marin planned to copy the tactics of the previous siege of Yeffer Castle, first blasting a hole in the city gate, and then sending the blasting team forward, burying a gunpowder barrel in the hole, and blowing up the city gate. Therefore, after surrounding Neumünster, Marin did nothing else except arranging artillery to bombard the city gate. And the blasting team led by Doni Srui was also eager to go forward and blow up the city gate at any time. Chapter 87 A Little Trick. After all, the gate of Neumünster was made of oak and could not withstand the continuous attack of 18-pound iron ball shells. Therefore, from the afternoon of the first day to the morning of the second day, in less than half a day, the north gate of Neumünster was blown open by Marin's dozen short-barreled Karen heavy cannons. Similarly, the gate was full of bricks and logs. But is this useful? Doni Srui, who was eager to make a contribution, was eager to carry the iron-covered door shield and the gunpowder barrel to blow up the city gate. But Marin stopped him, because the defenders holding big stones were waiting on the city gate tower. So Marin transferred more than a dozen 3-pound cannons and began to bombard the defenders on the city gate tower of Neumünster. After bombarding for a long time, no defender dared to show up, and Marin ordered Doni Srui to attack. Doni Srui was already an old hand at blasting the gate, so he easily buried the gunpowder barrel in the city gate hole and covered it with a lot of bricks. After lighting the fuse, Doni Srui picked up the door shield, held it on his head, and quickly fled from the city gate. Boom! With a loud bang, the north gate of Neumünster was blown open. Just like the last time at Yeffer Castle, after the oak door was destroyed, the bricks piled in the door began to slide, and the upper part of the city gate was exposed. Big shield soldiers, go! Schwartz shouted, and 100 soldiers carrying door shields covered with iron sheets rushed up, carrying door shields, and took the lead in climbing from the empty part of the upper part of the city gate into the city. Following behind them were 200 two-handed swordsmen who were responsible for covering them. These two-handed swordsmen were all martial arts masters selected from the 5,000 mercenaries in Hamburg. Although it is said that in the overall battle, Marin's army despised these mercenaries. However, when it comes to personal martial arts, Marin's warriors who came from rural youths are still no match for these experienced mercenaries. Therefore, in this battle for the city gate that requires personal bravery, Marin still activated the two-handed sword masters among the 200 mercenaries, and equipped them with breastplate armor and helmets with masks, so that they could protect the big shield soldiers and be responsible for certain offensive tasks. In addition, Marin also has his own little thoughts. This time it is a joint operation. It would be stupid if his army kept rushing to the front. These 5,000 Hamburg mercenaries are fighting on a large scale in the wild, and Marin may not be at ease with them. However, this kind of street fighting into the city has high casualties, but it is not difficult. Using these mercenaries with good personal martial arts is the best choice. There were only 500 regular troops in the city of Neumünster, and the rest were all temporarily recruited civilians. These civilians may still have combat effectiveness relying on the city walls, but after being attacked into the city, the civilians are useless. It is no exaggeration to say that those mercenary two-handed swordsmen with high martial arts skills can beat several civilians without any problem. Even facing the 500 veterans, they had an advantage. Just like that, after half a day of fierce fighting, the 500 veterans in the city were wiped out. As for the militiamen, they surrendered one after another. Hamel's son, the commander of the garrison, was unwilling to surrender, so he died under the guns of the musketeers under Marin during the counterattack. As soon as Hamel's son died, and most of the veterans died in battle, the militiamen who were temporarily recruited immediately lost their fighting spirit, laid down their weapons, and chose to surrender. In this siege, Marin only sent 100 large shield soldiers to rush in front, and the other teams followed the mercenaries. Therefore, Marin's army suffered few casualties, only one large shield soldier was killed unlucky. No one else was lost. It was the Hamburg mercenaries who were sent by Marin to the front to fight the enemy in close combat, and dozens of people were killed and wounded. For this reason, Weizmann, the commander of the Hamburg army, euphemistically expressed his dissatisfaction. After all, Marin clearly had a selfish motive and let the Hamburg mercenaries go to the front to die. However, this question is untenable. Because the 100 shield soldiers at the front are all East Frisian soldiers. Therefore, Weizmann could not find a good excuse to express his dissatisfaction publicly, and could only express his dissatisfaction in a tactful way. But who is Marin? A pragmatist. After being influenced by the interests first trend of thought in the later Chinese society, he didn't care about face, so what if he was shameless? I just favor my own soldiers, what can you do? Moreover, the Duchy of Holstein was not taken down by Marin. Therefore, Marin had already made up his mind that any siege operation in the Duchy of Holstein would choose to use the mercenaries of Hamburg to lead the charge. Of course, it is not accurate to say that they were the first to lead the charge. Because, at the forefront, it was the shield soldiers under Marin's command. So, even if Weizmann wanted to question Marin, because of the existence of the shield soldiers, there was no excuse. After occupying the city of Neumünster, Marin was too lazy to enforce strict military regulations. Moreover, he also needed to make some rewards to the Hamburg mercenaries who were at the forefront. Of course, it was impossible for Marin to pay for the reward of the Hamburg mercenaries. After all, they were not his subordinates. So Marin thought of a very unethical reward method, allowing the Hamburg mercenaries who rushed to the front during the siege to rob freely in the city. In fact, this was Marin's generosity of others. Because this city belonging to the Principality of Holstein will definitely not belong to him in the future. Letting the Hamburg mercenaries rob will not be lost by himself or his future subjects. Therefore, Marin was generous and let the remaining 182-handed swordsmen of the 200 Hamburg mercenaries who rushed to the front, the other 20 died in the battle, rob freely in the city as a reward for their bravery, and the time limit was 1 day. Of course, this was only limited to the 200 people who rushed to the front during the siege. Others were not allowed to rob. Whoever dared to do it privately, the law enforcement team was waiting to kill you. For this reason, Marin specially asked Schwartz, who was an adjutant, to sign 180 licenses and ask them to wear special clothes to avoid being enforced by the law enforcement team. Moreover, Marin repeatedly asked them that robbery was allowed, but killing was strictly prohibited, and rape of women was not allowed, otherwise the warlords would serve them. In this way, under the surveillance of the law enforcement team, the 180 lucky people began the happy time of robbery on orders early the next morning. When the 180 mercenaries were robbed on orders, Marin also quietly sent people to empty the official silver vaults and granaries in the city of Neumünster, in the name of replenishing military supplies. In fact, all these money and grain went into Marin's pocket. Marin regretted why he pretended to be a saint in Gluckstadt before. That was the capital of the Duchy of Holstein, and there was a lot of money and grain. Unfortunately, he emphasized discipline too much at that time, and as a result, the official stored money and grain were taken out and divided equally with Hamburg and Lübeck. Now, Marin decided that the official stored money and grain in the cities within the Duchy of Holstein should be put into his own pocket first. In addition, Marin also made a distinction for the merchants in the city. All Hanseatic merchants belong to the friendly camp and are naturally to be protected. For this reason, Marin sent guards to each Hanseatic merchant's shop and residence to organize the 180 guys who were ordered to rob to enter. As for other merchants or civilians, they were all the targets of arbitrary robbery by 180 people. In this way, by the second night, these 180 brave mercenaries were already covered with all kinds of property, which made other Hamburg mercenaries envious. After all, there were only 180 people participating in the robbery, so on average, everyone's income would be more. If everyone robbed together, there might not be so much. But others didn't dare. After all, Marin had 20,000 men, and they couldn't beat them. If you rob without permission, you will easily be hanged by the military court. In the evening, Marin also specially organized a group of Hanseatic merchants to recover the property robbed by the mercenaries. Although it was half price, it also made the mercenaries very happy. In the end, each of the 180 mercenaries robbed property worth at least hundreds of gold coins, which was equivalent to their salary for several years. These pure mercenaries, they come out to work, don't they just want to make money? After seeing that the 180 people have made a fortune, it is inevitable that they are tempted. So, they all find Marin or Schwartz, saying that they are also very brave, and they must let them take the lead in the next siege. But the mercenaries under Marin, although they are also mercenaries, are not so jealous because of their strict discipline and no experience of robbery. Besides, Marin's treatment is not bad, and there are rewards for military exploits, so there is no need to envy the 180 Hamburg mercenaries. Besides, they don't have that kind of tradition and habit. However, because of this little trick, Marin directly mobilized the enthusiasm of the 5,000 Hamburg mercenaries. The next siege, needless to say, they will also rush to ask for battle. Wiseman, the commander of the Hamburg mercenaries, was helpless about this. Although he didn't like Marin's behavior, it was undeniable that this trick was quite inspiring. Moreover, those mercenaries were not local people in Hamburg, but they were hired by them for money. Even if they died, Hamburg would not feel too bad. It was just that they were currently under Hamburg, and Wiseman felt a little uncomfortable being plotted against by Marin. Moreover, the city they robbed might belong to Hamburg in the future. However, since mercenaries of this era generally had the habit of robbing, Wiseman could not say anything. Otherwise, he would be blocking the way to wealth and become an enemy of the mercenaries. Chapter 88 The Influence of the Hanseatic League. It has been 20 days since East Frisia, together with Lübeck, Hamburg and Sweden, declared war on Denmark. During these days, this news spread throughout Germany. Different countries have different reactions to this, some gloated, some were dissatisfied, and some supported. For example, King Hans's brother-in-law, Elector Frederick III of Saxony, expressed dissatisfaction. Because his sister Christina was the queen of King Hans. However, Frederick III, as the Elector of Saxony, was very conflicted at this time. Because, although he is the brother-in-law of the King of Denmark, he is also a vested interest in the Hanseatic League. Because there are several Hanseatic cities in the electorate of Saxony, which are an important source of tax revenue for the electorate. Moreover, Frederick III himself had also borrowed a large amount of money from the Hanseatic League, and he has not yet repaid it. Therefore, Frederick III was the most conflicted about the Quadruple Alliance's attack on Denmark. On the one hand, he is a vested interest of the Hanseatic League, and the troops are sent from the Hanseatic League's boss Lübeck and the Second Hamburg. On the other hand, Denmark is his sister's country. Therefore, after struggling for a long time, the Elector of Saxony chose to wait and see for the time being. After all, if he offends the boss and second of the Hanseatic League and the cities in his territory are expelled from the Hanseatic League, he will lose a lot of money. Before his own interests and the interests of his sister's family, Frederick III finally chose himself. However, he is more wise and publicly called on both sides to restrain themselves, and it is better to stop the war and sit down to negotiate. But in the current situation, this kind of call is no different from not saying it. After all, the two sides have already fought a real fire. And the four-power alliance has such an advantage, how can it stop? But since Frederick III has expressed his position, it is not considered to be disregarding his sister's life and death, and it is barely acceptable morally. In addition, to be honest, Frederick III is also very afraid of Marin, the evil star. Last time, his uncle led an army of 26,000 and was annihilated. This time, it is said that Marin led 30,000 coalition forces. God knows what kind of bloody storm will be set off. The electorate of Saxony alone has no confidence that it can successfully intervene. This is also an important reason why Frederick III finally chose neutrality. However, as one of the 7 electors, Frederick III still has a great influence. In order to protect his sister and brother-in-law, he has begun to act secretly and contact other electors, trying to use political pressure to prevent the four-power alliance from going too far. At least, it cannot threaten the status of Hans and his wife. Otherwise, if Marin, an impulsive guy, rushes into Copenhagen and kills his sister and brother-in-law, it will be bad. At that time, he will have to be involved in the war. In fact, Marin has also been guarding against the electorate of Saxony in the south. After all, as the brother-in-law of King Hans, Marin does not know whether Frederick III will impulsively send troops to rescue. When he told this concern to Hamburg military commander Weizmann was not worried at all. Lord Marin, you worry too much. Although Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, is not yet 40 years old, he is a real old fox. He will not do anything without certainty. What's more, he is also afraid of being sanctioned by the Hanseatic League. Sanctions from the Hanseatic League? Marin was a little curious. He felt that the Hanseatic League was so powerful that an elector could impose sanctions just because he wanted to. Yes, if it were other electors, they might not be afraid of sanctions from the Hanseatic League. But Saxony Business Circle is the second largest business circle in the Hanseatic League. The Elector of Saxony and the Duke of Saxony receive a lot of commercial taxes every year because of several Hanseatic cities in their territory. In addition, the Duchy of Saxony, which paid you 1 million gold coins in compensation, would not be able to support itself if it were not for the loans from Hanseatic merchants. Ah! Did you lend the Duchy of Saxony? Marin was a little stunned. It seems that their allies funded their enemies. Of course, after all, we were not allies at that time. Weizmann was a little embarrassed. I understand, but will the Elector of Saxony be afraid of you? Let me put it this way, Lord Marin, more than half of the fiscal revenue of the Electorate of Saxony and the Duchy of Saxony comes from commercial taxes in the Hanseatic cities within their borders. And Lübeck and our Hamburg are the two most influential in the Hanseatic League. If the Elector of Saxony dares to challenge us, we can completely expel the membership of the Hanseatic cities of the Electorate of Saxony. In the future, the business of those cities will suffer a fatal blow, and the fiscal revenue of the Electorate of Saxony will be reduced by more than half. Weizmann said confidently. Marin was a little stunned and murmured, "So awesome, so awesome." At this time, Marin began to face up to the strength of Lübeck, the leader of the Hanseatic League, and Hamburg, the deputy leader of the Hanseatic League. Although, the combined army strength of these two cities is not as strong as their own. However, their influence was too scary. They could force an elector not to come forward to protect his sister easily. Sure enough, Marin waited and waited, but did not receive the news that the Elector of Saxony sent troops. Instead, he received Frederick III's call for a truce. But how much is this call worth? It's completely insignificant. Before, the reason why Marin spent so much time in Gluckstadt, the capital of the Principality of Holstein, was not only to teach the mercenaries of Hamburg the rules, but also to guard against the interference of the Electorate of Saxony. Now that the Elector of Saxony has admitted his weakness and dared not interfere, he was relieved. At the same time, he also had a new understanding of the influence of the Hanseatic League. This alliance has strong financial resources and huge political influence. Marin is unwilling to provoke if it is not necessary. Before, Denmark relied on the joint forces of three kingdoms, Denmark, Norway and weakness, and two duchies, the Duchy of Schleswig and the Duchy of Holstein, to barely suppress Lübeck and Hamburg. Now, because of his intrusion, the two cities of Lübeck and Hamburg actually have the confidence to challenge the powerful Kalmar League, which is incredible. Moreover, according to Weizmann's introduction, most cities in Germany, except some two small cities, have the existence of the Hanseatic League. They obtained many commercial and political privileges by lending money to lords in various places. During this period, many lords were very poor. In order to maintain a luxurious life, some people relied entirely on loans from the Hanseatic League to maintain their finances. Therefore, the influence of the Hanseatic League on the lords is also huge. Even political giants like the Elector of Saxony have to look at the face of the Hanseatic League, not to mention those ordinary small nobles. At this moment, Marin suddenly had the idea of forming a long-term alliance with the Hanseatic League. Originally, the alliance between East Frisia and Lübeck and Hamburg was just a temporary covenant. Because the two sides only came together temporarily because of their common enemy, Denmark. However, it seems that the Hanseatic League is so powerful that Marin also needs such a powerful ally to speak for himself. Although the Hanseatic League is only a commercial alliance and has no seats in the imperial parliament, it was not until the 30 Years' War, in the 17th century that Hanseatic cities gradually obtained the qualifications to participate in the imperial parliament. For example, Hamburg was not qualified to attend the imperial parliament and vote until 1770. However, its political influence should not be underestimated. Because many imperial cities, such as Cologne and Dortmund, are both imperial cities and Hanseatic cities, and are easily influenced by the Hanseatic League. Although imperial cities such as Aachen, Nuremberg, and Augsburg have not officially joined the Hanseatic League, they have very close relations with the Hanseatic League, especially in terms of interests. As long as the Hanseatic League says hello, it is difficult for them to refuse. Because if you anger the Hanseatic League, it is not difficult to paralyze your business. The reason why the imperial city can become an imperial city is that it relies on business to be financially independent. If the business is paralyzed, the city will not be able to survive. Therefore, the Hanseatic League has a strong influence on most imperial cities. For this reason, Marin changed his original position and began to take the initiative to make friends with Lübeck and Hamburg. After all, these two cities are the leaders and vice-leaders of the Hanseatic League. If they come forward to speak for him, the imperial cities must give him face. Chapter 89, The Concept of the Kiel Canal. Because of the order from the Prime Minister Bentheim, most of the cities in Holstein who found the steppes chose to surrender. Of course, there were also some who resisted stubbornly like Neumünster, and some who were waiting and watching. However, the coalition forces were so fierce that they captured the solid city of Neumünster in 2 days, which greatly shocked other cities. So, those cities who were waiting and watching chose to surrender one after another and no longer changed their course with the wind. In fact, the reason why the siege was so smooth was inseparable from the application of heavy artillery and the use of gunpowder barrels. After all, in this era, the gates of various cities were still mainly made of oak. No matter how thick they could not withstand the continuous smashing of 18-pound iron ball shells. You know, even those warships with thickened sides would not be able to bear the continuous smashing of 18-pound iron balls at the same point. Although the city gates are thick, they are different from warships. The warships kept shaking, and it was difficult for artillery to hit the same point twice in a row. As long as it is not broken once, it is difficult to be penetrated. But the city gate is different. The city gate is fixed and will not move. The artillery can fire horizontally. As long as the angle is adjusted, it can be repeatedly bombarded at the same point. No matter how strong the city gate is, as long as it is a wooden door, it cannot withstand such continuous attacks. Therefore, it is only a matter of time before the city gate is broken. Then, bury a gunpowder barrel in the hole that was blown open, and it is difficult not to blow it up. After easily blasting open the castle gate of a stubborn baron with an 18-pound heavy artillery, Marin said to Schwartz beside him with emotion, "It seems that we have to cover the city gate with iron plates, otherwise, it can't withstand artillery bombardment." "Master is wise," Schwartz said respectfully. In fact, Schwartz was also frightened by the power of the 18-pound short-barreled Karen heavy artillery. Although it consumes a lot more gunpowder than the Cohorn mortar, it is also more powerful. No matter how strong the city gate is, it is inevitable that it will be penetrated under the continuous bombardment of more than a dozen 18-pound artillery. Oak doors should indeed be eliminated in front of heavy artillery. In fact, the gates of many large cities in the east at the same time were covered with bronze and covered with copper nails to enhance the solidity of the gates. However, copper in Europe is too expensive. At this time, even the wealthy Hanseatic cities did not have the luxury of covering the city gates with copper. However, Marin's example of using heavy artillery to easily blow open the city gate will encourage all countries to cover the city gates with metal. If not, if you encounter artillery in the future, breaking the door is just around the corner. Because he has made up his mind to make friends with the Hanseatic League, Marin will no longer go to those cities that have announced their surrender to plunder official money and food. For this reason, Marin specifically notified Lübeck and Hamburg and asked them to send people to take over these cities. And he led the army to continue northward and march towards the Duchy of Schleswig. In Kiel, Lübeck's 5,000 troops also moved very smoothly. Because Kiel was originally a Hanseatic city. Although the Danish King Hans sent troops and nobles to manage the city, the Hanseatic merchants in the city were still very powerful. When Marin stayed in Gluckstadt, the Lübeck army attacked the city of Kiel. The Hanseatic Big Brother's army came to kill. How could the Hanseatic merchants in the city resist? Even at night, several Hanseatic merchants sent all their guards to attack and open the city gates to welcome the Lübeck army into the city. Although the defenders of Kiel put up a tenacious resistance, there were only a few hundred regular troops in the city, and the city gates were opened. Under the attack of the 5,000 Lübeck army, the defenders in the city were wiped out. In this way, Lübeck easily controlled Kiel, a Hanseatic commercial city. When Marin's army conquered Neumünster, the Lübeck army that conquered Kiel, after leaving a few hundred defenders, followed and joined Marin's army. By the way, let's talk about the ownership of Neumünster. Of course, Lübeck wants to negotiate with Hamburg about the division of the Duchy of Holstein, and Marin cannot intervene. At present, there are 6 major cities in the Duchy of Holstein, namely Kiel, Gluckstadt, Neumünster, Itzehoe, Bad Oldesloe and Heide. Among them, Gluckstadt is the capital, but because it is close to Hamburg, it is obviously to be assigned to Hamburg. Kiel is on the east coast and is obviously also to be under the jurisdiction of Lübeck. Although Heide is nominally under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Holstein, it is now the territory of the Dithmarschen people who are seeking autonomy, and does not belong to Denmark. Strictly speaking, the reason why King Hans of Denmark is so unlucky is because of the Dithmarschen people. Because the Dithmarschen people dug the reservoir dam through the Battle of Hemmingstad and flooded the Danish army, causing King Hans of Denmark, who sent tens of thousands of troops and personally led the expedition, to lose most of his elite troops and escape with only a few survivors. Afterwards, seeing that the Danes were frustrated, the Swedish regent, Old Sten Sture, dared to rise up again and declare Sweden's independence. It was precisely because of Sweden's independence that the four-party alliance took advantage of the emptiness of Denmark's rear and sent troops to stab Denmark hard. Therefore, the 3 parties involved in the land-based troops East Frisia, Lübeck and Hamburg, all didn't know what to do with Dithmarschen. According to the geographical location, the Dithmarschen area, together with the capital Heide, should be assigned to Hamburg. However, Hamburg was not happy. Because the Dithmarschen people have too strong a spirit of resistance. If it is assigned to Dithmarschen, it is equivalent to taking over a huge trouble. For this reason, Hamburg demanded that the Dithmarschen area be separated from the Principality of Holstein, and then divide the remaining cities with Lübeck. But Lübeck disagreed. They felt that Heide was a city in the west coast area and should belong to Hamburg. Then, the city of Neumünster is located in the middle and a little east of the area, and should belong to Lübeck. Hamburg, on the other hand, felt that the Dithmarschen area did not belong to the jurisdiction of the Principality of Holstein and should not be assigned to Hamburg. At the same time, they also wanted Neumünster. In this way, the representatives of the two cities quarreled on the spot, neither of them giving in. Marin did not care about the ownership of Neumünster. Anyway, it was not his territory. However, if the representatives of Lübeck and Hamburg were allowed to quarrel like this, it would miss the opportunity to fight. So he said to Weizmann, the representative of Hamburg, and Hermann, the representative of Lübeck, "You two, the ownership of Neumünster should be handed over to the two speakers for negotiation. You two are just military commanders, and your words do not count." As soon as Marin's words came out, the representatives of Lübeck and Hamburg reacted yes, they were just representatives sent by their respective parliaments to command troops. The real power is still in the hands of their respective parliaments. Therefore, Hermann, the military representative of Lübeck, and Weizmann, the representative of Hamburg, put aside their prejudices, temporarily surrounded Marin, and continued to go north, and attacked the Duchy of Schleswig as planned. However, after taking Rendsburg, which is at the junction of the Duchy of Holstein and the Duchy of Schleswig, the three families were a little embarrassed. Because the ownership of this city has become a big problem. The process of taking Rendsburg was uneventful. Marin sent artillery to blow a hole in the city gate, and then the demolition soldiers went up to blow up the city gate. Then, the big shield soldiers led a group of mercenaries into the city to clear out the rebels. But the ownership of Rendsburg, an important Hanseatic commercial city, is a little unclear. Originally, Rendsburg belonged to the Duchy of Holstein. However, after Christian I of the Oldenburg family became the Duke of Holstein and the Duke of Schleswig in 1460, he placed Rendsburg under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Schleswig. The traditional boundary between the Duchy of Holstein and the Duchy of Schleswig was the Ida River, the largest river in the area. But Rendsburg happened to be right beside the Ida River, and it was unclear whether it was on the south or north bank of Rendsburg. According to tradition, Lenzburg should belong to the Duchy of Holstein. But according to the current situation, it is under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Schleswig. Marin naturally hopes that Lenzburg belongs to Schleswig, but Hamburg thinks that Lenzburg should belong to Holstein. It is best to divide Heide from the Duchy of Holstein and assign Lenzburg to Hamburg. Because Hamburg is not willing to take over the Dithmarschen area, which is still in rebellion, so as not to fall into the pit of rebellion. Even in order to get Lenzburg, Hamburg is willing to give up the sovereignty of the Dithmarschen area, later Dithmarschen county, and exchange it with Marin for control of Lenzburg. Marin was a little confused and although Lenzburg is prosperous, it is just a city. The people of Hamburg are willing to use such a large place as Dithmarschen county to exchange for a city. In the long run, it is definitely worthwhile for him. Although the rebellion in Dithmarschen county is still going on, the people of Hamburg are afraid of rebellion, but who is Marin? Will he be afraid of this? At most, we can just kill more rebels. You know, Dithmarschen county has more than 1,000 square kilometers. If it is reclaimed, there will be a lot of arable land. So, Marin was not afraid of trouble and agreed to exchange the prosperous commercial city of Rendsburg for the still rebellious area of Dithmarschen. Of course, Weizmann could not make the decision. This matter still needs to be decided by the Hamburg Parliament in the end. However, Weizmann felt that the Hamburg Parliament would definitely agree. Because Rendsburg is a Hanseatic commercial city and is relatively prosperous. Moreover, it is close to Kiel, and there is the Ida River and the North Sea to the west, which has great commercial prospects. What is Hamburg? It is a Hanseatic commercial city. What businessmen value most is the area with developed trade. As for land, they don't rely on land for their livelihood, but they don't care as much as Marin. In fact, Marin clearly remembers that Rendsburg, which is right next to the famous Kiel Canal in later generations, is indeed a very important place. It is indeed very good for developing business. But at the same time, Marin also remembered that the section of the later Kiel Canal near the North Sea was the boundary between Dithmarschen County and Steinberg County, capital Itzehoe. Even if Rendsburg was lost, the Kiel Canal could still be used as long as the entire Dithmarschen County was taken. Of course, the premise was that Lübeck and Hamburg were willing to dig the canal according to the planning of the later Kiel Canal. In fact, it was not unreasonable for the German authorities to choose to dig a canal here. Because there were originally many natural rivers along the route of the later Kiel Canal. To dig the Kiel Canal, you only need to connect these rivers together, widen them and deepen them. But after a field investigation, Marin found that if a canal was dug, it would be more convenient to make good use of the existing Ida River. Because the Ida River is right next to Rendsburg to the east. And Rendsburg is only 20 to 30 kilometers away from Kiel. Not only that, to the east of Rendsburg, there is a large river called Obereider, which extends a long distance to the east. If we follow this river channel and dig eastward for more than 10 or 20 kilometers, we can connect to the port of Kiel. The reason why the Kiel Canal in later generations did not choose to connect to the Ida River, but chose to dig downwards, is probably because Hamburg is below. Because when the canal was dug, Hamburg was the largest port city in Germany. Since the canal was dug, Hamburg must be considered. Although it is more convenient to open a canal on the Ida River, its western estuary, Tunning, is also a bit far from Hamburg. More importantly, the Ida River is not straight, but winding. It is a waste of time to use it for sailing. Moreover, if the river channel is not straight, it is also inconvenient for those long ships of more than 100 meters in later generations to travel on the winding river channel. If you are not careful, you may run aground. Therefore, it is more convenient to dig a straight canal leading to the largest port of Hamburg. However, this needs to take into account the issue of age. In this era, there are no ships over 100 meters long, and there are few ships over 30 meters long. It is more convenient to use the Ida River to dig a canal on the spot. Because the distance to be dug is much smaller than the engineering workload of the Kiel Canal in later generations. There were no machines in this era, and both digging and pumping were completely dependent on manpower. Therefore, it is better to reduce the engineering workload as much as possible. Even if pure manual labor is used to dig a distance of more than 10 or 20 kilometers, it only takes 3 to 5 years. If it is dozens of kilometers, it will take more than 10 years to dig. At the end of the 19th century, with the help of steam engines, it took 8 years to dig through the power of all Germany. With today's scientific and technological power, it is estimated that it will take more than 10 years to dig. But if it is replaced by directly using the Ida River for connection, then, even without the help of machines, it can be dug through in 3 to 5 years. Of course, in the long run, the Ida River used to be winding and tortuous, and it is indeed not suitable as a navigable canal. However, the most important thing at the moment is to solve the problem of whether there is or not the problem of whether it is good or not. Therefore, Marin believes that the Ida River should be used to connect Kiel and build a canal first. As for the problem of the river channel not being straight, in the future, another canal channel directly connecting Hamburg can be dug while navigating. After the new river channel is dug, it will not be too late to block and abandon the Ida River, and connect and activate the new river channel. So Marin drew the plan on a blueprint, and wrote a long paragraph of text notes to put forward his own opinions. Then, he first copied the same one, and then entrusted Weizmann and Hermann to send the blueprint to the parliaments of Lübeck and Hamburg, expressing his own views and suggesting that the Ida River be used first to dig a river channel connecting Kiel and build the canal first. In this way, there will be no need to look at Denmark's face in the future. Chapter 90, Conquering the Duchy of Schleswig. Because of the order from the Prime Minister Bentheim, most of the cities in Holstein who found the steppes chose to surrender. Of course, there were also some who resisted stubbornly like Neumünster, and some who were waiting and watching. However, the coalition forces were so fierce that they captured the solid city of Neumünster in 2 days, which greatly shocked other cities. So, those cities who were waiting and watching chose to surrender one after another and no longer changed their course with the wind. In fact, the reason why the siege was so smooth was inseparable from the application of heavy artillery and the use of gunpowder barrels. After all, in this era, the gates of various cities were still mainly made of oak. No matter how thick they were, they could not withstand the continuous smashing of 18-pound iron ball shells. You know, even those warships with thickened sides would not be able to bear the continuous smashing of 18-pound iron balls at the same point. Although the city gates are thick, they are different from warships. The warships kept shaking, and it was difficult for artillery to hit the same point twice in a row. As long as it is not broken once, it is difficult to be penetrated. But the city gate is different. The city gate is fixed and will not move. The artillery can fire horizontally. As long as the angle is adjusted, it can be repeatedly bombarded at the same point. No matter how strong the city gate is, as long as it is a wooden door, it cannot withstand such continuous attacks. Therefore, it is only a matter of time before the city gate is broken. Then, bury a gunpowder barrel in the hole that was blown open, and it is difficult not to blow it up. After easily blasting open the castle gate of a stubborn baron with an 18-pound heavy artillery, Marin said to Schwartz beside him with emotion, "It seems that we have to cover the city gate with iron plates, otherwise, it can't withstand artillery bombardment." "Master is wise," Schwartz said respectfully. In fact, Schwartz was also frightened by the power of the 18-pound short-barreled Karen heavy artillery. Although it consumes a lot more gunpowder than the Cohorn mortar, it is also more powerful. No matter how strong the city gate is, it is inevitable that it will be penetrated under the continuous bombardment of more than a dozen 18-pound artillery. Oak doors should indeed be eliminated in front of heavy artillery. In fact, the gates of many large cities in the east at the same time were covered with bronze and covered with copper nails to enhance the solidity of the gates. However, copper in Europe is too expensive. At this time, even the wealthy Hanseatic cities did not have the luxury of covering the city gates with copper. However, Marin's example of using heavy artillery to easily blow open the city gate will encourage all countries to cover the city gates with metal. If not, if you encounter artillery in the future, breaking the door is just around the corner. Because he has made up his mind to make friends with the Hanseatic League, Marin will no longer go to those cities that have announced their surrender to plunder official money and food. For this reason, Marin specifically notified Lübeck and Hamburg and asked them to send people to take over these cities. And he led the army to continue northward and march towards the Duchy of Schleswig. In Kiel, Lübeck's 5,000 troops also moved very smoothly. Because Kiel was originally a Hanseatic city. Although the Danish King Hans sent troops and nobles to manage the city, the Hanseatic merchants in the city were still very powerful. When Marin stayed in Gluckstadt, the Lübeck army attacked the city of Kiel. The Hanseatic Big Brother's army came to kill. How could the Hanseatic merchants in the city resist? Even at night, several Hanseatic merchants sent all their guards to attack and open the city gates to welcome the Lübeck army into the city. Although the defenders of Kiel put up a tenacious resistance, there were only a few hundred regular troops in the city, and the city gates were opened. Under the attack of the 5,000 Lübeck army, the defenders in the city were wiped out. In this way, Lübeck easily controlled Kiel, a Hanseatic commercial city. When Marin's army conquered Neumünster, the Lübeck army that conquered Kiel, after leaving a few hundred defenders, followed and joined Marin's army. By the way, let's talk about the ownership of Neumünster. Of course, Lübeck wants to negotiate with Hamburg about the division of the Duchy of Holstein, and Marin cannot intervene. At present, there are 6 major cities in the Duchy of Holstein, namely Kiel, Gluckstadt, Neumünster, Itzehoe, Bad Oldesloe and Heide. Among them, Gluckstadt is the capital, but because it is close to Hamburg, it is obviously to be assigned to Hamburg. Kiel is on the east coast and is obviously also to be under the jurisdiction of Lübeck. Although Heide is nominally under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Holstein, it is now the territory of the Dithmarschen people who are seeking autonomy, and does not belong to Denmark. Strictly speaking, the reason why King Hans of Denmark is so unlucky is because of the Dithmarschen people. Because the Dithmarschen people dug the reservoir dam through the Battle of Hemmingstad and flooded the Danish army, causing King Hans of Denmark, who sent tens of thousands of troops and personally led the expedition, to lose most of his elite troops and escape with only a few survivors. Afterwards, seeing that the Danes were frustrated, the Swedish regent, Old Sten Sture, dared to rise up again and declare Sweden's independence. It was precisely because of Sweden's independence that the four-party alliance took advantage of the emptiness of Denmark's rear and sent troops to stab Denmark hard. Therefore, the 3 parties involved in the land-based troops East Frisia, Lübeck and Hamburg, all didn't know what to do with Dithmarschen. According to the geographical location, the Dithmarschen area, together with the capital Heide, should be assigned to Hamburg. However, Hamburg was not happy. Because the Dithmarschen people have too strong a spirit of resistance. If it is assigned to Dithmarschen, it is equivalent to taking over a huge trouble. For this reason, Hamburg demanded that the Dithmarschen area be separated from the Principality of Holstein, and then divide the remaining cities with Lübeck. But Lübeck disagreed. They felt that Heide was a city in the west coast area and should belong to Hamburg. Then, the city of Neumünster is located in the middle and a little east of the area, and should belong to Lübeck. Hamburg, on the other hand, felt that the Dithmarschen area did not belong to the jurisdiction of the Principality of Holstein and should not be assigned to Hamburg. At the same time, they also wanted Neumünster. In this way, the representatives of the 2 cities quarreled on the spot, neither of them giving in. Marin did not care about the ownership of Neumünster. Anyway, it was not his territory. However, if the representatives of Lübeck and Hamburg were allowed to quarrel like this, it would miss the opportunity to fight. So he said to Weizmann, the representative of Hamburg, and Hermann, the representative of Lübeck, "You two, the ownership of Neumünster should be handed over to the 2 speakers for negotiation. You two are just military commanders, and your words do not count." As soon as Marin's words came out, the representatives of Lübeck and Hamburg reacted yes, they were just representatives sent by their respective parliaments to command troops. The real power is still in the hands of their respective parliaments. Therefore, Hermann, the military representative of Lübeck, and Weizmann, the representative of Hamburg, put aside their prejudices, temporarily surrounded Marin, and continued to go north, and attacked the Duchy of Schleswig as planned. However, after taking Rendsburg, which is at the junction of the Duchy of Holstein and the Duchy of Schleswig, the three families were a little embarrassed. Because the ownership of this city has become a big problem. The process of taking Rendsburg was uneventful. Marin sent artillery to blow a hole in the city gate, and then the demolition soldiers went up to blow up the city gate. Then, the big shield soldiers led a group of mercenaries into the city to clear out the rebels. But the ownership of Rendsburg, an important Hanseatic commercial city, is a little unclear. Originally, Rendsburg belonged to the Duchy of Holstein. However, after Christian I of the Oldenburg family became the Duke of Holstein and the Duke of Schleswig in 1460, he placed Rendsburg under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Schleswig. The traditional boundary between the Duchy of Holstein and the Duchy of Schleswig was the Ida River, the largest river in the area. But Rendsburg happened to be right beside the Ida River, and it was unclear whether it was on the south or north bank of Rendsburg. According to tradition, Lenzburg should belong to the Duchy of Holstein. But according to the current situation, it is under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Schleswig. Marin naturally hopes that Lenzburg belongs to Schleswig, but Hamburg thinks that Lenzburg should belong to Holstein. It is best to divide Heidi from the Duchy of Holstein and assign Lenzburg to Hamburg. Because Hamburg is not willing to take over the Dithmarschen area, which is still in rebellion, so as not to fall into the pit of rebellion. Even in order to get Lenzburg, Hamburg is willing to give up the sovereignty of the Dithmarschen area, later Dithmarschen County, and exchange it with Marin for control of Lenzburg. Marin's plan drawings were quickly delivered to Hamburg and Lübeck, but they were rejected by Lübeck. Although Kiel is now a subordinate city of Lübeck, the core of Lübeck is definitely Lübeck. Therefore, in the eyes of Lübeck councillors, it is better for the canal to go directly to Lübeck. Hamburg has the same idea. Although it is easier to dig a canal between Rendsburg and Kiel, they are not very happy because it does not go to Hamburg. When the news from Lübeck came, the Hamburg parliament also rejected Marin's proposal. However, Weizmann's plan to exchange Dithmarschen County for Rendsburg was passed by the Hamburg parliament. Why did this result occur? The main reason is that there is no agricultural tax in Europe at this time, only commercial tax. No matter how vast the countryside is, no tax is collected, and the benefits are taken away by the manor owners and nobles. For the Hamburg parliament, no matter how vast the countryside is, it is not as important as a Hanseatic city that can levy commercial taxes. Therefore, the Hamburg parliament finally decided to exchange Dithmarschen County for the Hanseatic commercial city of Rendsburg. Marin was a little dumbfounded, taking a county of more than 1,000 square kilometers in exchange for a small town of only a few square kilometers including the suburbs. Did the Hamburg parliamentarians learn mathematics from the gatekeeper? But who cares, the one who will benefit in the end is himself. Although there may be no tax revenue in the short term, Marin believes that he will benefit more in the end. After all, a Dithmarschen county is basically one-third the size of the East Frisian state. As for the local resistance force, it was never in Marin's eyes. As long as we guard against the other side's old tricks and flood the 7 armies, our side will definitely win over the other side. You know, the last time Dithmarschen resisted Denmark, it only used 1,000 main militias and 3,000 civilians. In front of Marin's 20,000 troops, this number of people is absolutely difficult to resist. As for Wolf Esprand, who used floods to drown thousands of Danish elites, Marin is very interested in meeting him. After all, in Europe, which is used to head-on confrontation, it is rare to come up with a strategy to drown the enemy by breaking the dam. In this way, Marin handed over the Hanseatic commercial city of Lenzburg, which had just been captured, to Hamburg. Then, he continued to lead his army and began to march towards other areas of the Duchy of Schleswig. The Duchy of Schleswig is not only about 5,200 square kilometers of land north of the Ida River in the later state of Schleswig-Holstein, but also includes about 3,900 square kilometers of land north of the border between Germany and Denmark in later generations. That piece of land was later called South Jutland. If South Jutland in Denmark in later generations is included, the area of the Duchy of Schleswig has reached a total of 9,200 square kilometers. Of course, the Duchy of Schleswig has actually long belonged to the Danish principalities. In 1460, Christian I of the Oldenburg family, after inheriting the Duchy of Holstein and the Duchy of Schleswig at the same time, announced that the two duchies were connected and inseparable. Although 2 palace ministers were set up, stationed in Gluckstadt and Schleswig, respectively, according to the Treaty of Ribe signed by Christian I in 1460, the two principalities are never separated. But whether it is Marin, Lübeck or Hamburg, they don't take the Treaty of Ribe seriously. After all, it is a treaty signed by people, not God's will, and there is nothing that cannot be changed. At most, force the current King Hans of Denmark to sign another treaty. In fact, the situation of the Duchy of Schleswig is very complicated. In the later South Jutland area, all the people living are Danes. However, the areas south of South Jutland are all Germans. Therefore, when Germany and Denmark signed an agreement in the 19th century, the southern half of Schleswig, which was all Germans, was assigned to Germany, and the northern half, which was all Danes, was assigned to Denmark. In other words, the Schleswig area is full of Germans in the south and Danes in the north, which are completely two different places. However, Marin is not very worried. Because, in this era, nationalism has not yet emerged, and people don't care much about the differences between Germans and Danes. As long as they treat the people well and let them live a good life, they don't care who rules them. The rise of real nationalism is still a matter of the 19th century. At present, there is no problem with the unification of the Catholic region in Europe. As long as it is not unified with the Orthodox Church or the Green Church, there will be no big problems. Of course, the rulers cannot oppress the people too much. As for whether the Danish king agrees or not, Marin is not worried. He will take the army and occupy Schleswig, including the Jutland Peninsula. If the Danish king Hans is unwilling to cede the Duchy of Schleswig and the Duchy of Holstein, the entire Jutland will not be returned to Denmark. The Duchy of Schleswig is mainly composed of several cities such as Schleswig City, Husum, Eckernford, Flensburg, Ribe, and Ebenra. Of course, these cities are not big, only Schleswig City and Flensburg are presentable. The other cities are small cities with underdeveloped commerce. Among them, Husum is the capital of North Frisia County. In North Frisia County, which covers an area of more than 2,000 square kilometers, most people are Frisians and speak Frisian, which is one of the important reasons why Marin is willing to take the Duchy of Schleswig. After all, Frisian fishermen are an important source of sailors for him to dominate the ocean. The city of Schleswig is not far to the north of Lensburg. After setting out from Lensburg, Marin led an army of 28,000 and surrounded the city of Schleswig. Then, of course, artillery bombarded the gate. But what Marin didn't expect was that after learning that Marin's artillery was bombarding the south gate with all its strength, Mert, the palace prime minister of the Duchy of Schleswig, directly sent out all the masons to use a large number of bricks to completely build a wall inside the south gate, and it was a very thick wall. When Marin's artillery blasted open the oak gate of Schleswig city, Doni Srui rushed to the gate and was a little dumbfounded. Because there was no place to put the gunpowder barrel. After all, behind the oak door was a thick wall, and there was no gap to put the gunpowder barrel. So, Doni Srui had to return to the formation in a huff and report the situation to Marin. What? The other side built a wall on the inside of the city gate? This is too much. Marin was also a little stunned. Before, the cities that Marin attacked all chose to face bricks, stones and wood behind the city gate. Although it was blocked tightly, there were still gaps. Doni Srui only needed to dig a few more times to find space to place the gunpowder barrel. However, the other party had blocked the gate hole behind the city gate, forming a dead wall, so it was difficult to place the gunpowder barrel. Even if the gunpowder barrel was placed, it would be difficult to blow up the thick wall. Because loosely piled bricks, stones and wood, and a complete wall are two completely different concepts. In desperation, Marin had to order the artillery position to be moved and the 16 heavy artillery pieces were divided into two, one to bombard the west gate with all its strength, and the other to bombard the north gate with all its strength. The next day, holes were blown out of both gates. Marin sent a demolition team to check and found at the back of the west gate was also built into a dead wall by masons. But behind the north gate, only a part was built and it was not completed. The yellow mud between the bricks was still wet and not strong enough. So, Marin decisively ordered Donitsri to bring 3 members of the demolition team, 3 gunpowder barrels and iron pickaxes, and forcibly dug a big hole in the newly built wall, put 3 gunpowder barrels in and buried them, and then ignited them. The 3 gunpowder barrels blew down the wall of the north gate, which was only half built. Then, Marin ordered the big shield soldiers in front and the 2-handed swordsmen in the back, and bravely rushed into the city of Schleswig, killing Mert and other local nobles. The next few small towns were easier to fight. The gate of Husum was made very thin, far less solid than that of Schleswig. Marin ordered an hour of bombardment, and the gate of Husum was blown up. Marin didn't even need to send out a demolition team, and the local defenders immediately chose to surrender. As the second largest city in the Duchy of Schleswig, Flensburg's gate was strong enough, but it couldn't stop the barbaric city-breaking mode of heavy artillery plus gunpowder barrel explosion. After the city was broken, the local defenders and nobles chose to surrender. In the area north of Flensburg, Marin encountered more resistance. Because, to the north of Flensburg, it entered the Danish inhabited area from the German inhabited area. Although Marin's army was disciplined and did not rob the people. However, as the old saying goes, those who are not of my race must have different hearts, the Danish nobles had a very low sense of identity with the coalition forces and their resistance was very strong. Basically, after entering the Danish area, no town or manor was willing to surrender voluntarily. As a last resort, Marin had to divide his troops and eliminate these stubborn towns and manors one by one, killing people in a bloodbath. When they reached the city of Obenro, although the city gates were blasted open and the army rushed in, no local noble was willing to surrender. As a result, all 48 local nobles of Obenro were killed in the battle, and none of them surrendered. Before they died in the battle, they also brought casualties to Marin's army that had never occurred in other cities, a full 300 people. In a rage, Marin, regardless of his entire family, arrested the families of the 48 local nobles who fought to the death. When the army marched to the city of Ribe, Marin killed all the family members of the 48 stubborn nobles of Obenro, a total of 230 people, in front of all the defenders of Ribe. For a while, before the battle started, blood was flowing outside the city of Ribe, and the air was filled with the screams of women and children. The nobles defending the city of Ribe were all terrified. They didn't expect that they would encounter a man like Marin who completely disregarded the honor of the nobles and actually slaughtered innocent noble families in public. Killing women and children in public, and they were all noble families, was tantamount to being completely shameless. Faced with such a shameless Marin, the nobles of the city of Ribe were also terrified. In order to avoid the death of the whole family after the city was broken, the city of Ribe chose to surrender without a fierce battle. So far, the Duchy of Schleswig was completely captured by the coalition forces, leaving only some remote rural areas that had not been occupied. And only a month and a few days had passed. The day when Marin took over the city of Ribe was only March 15th, which was a good time for spring plowing.